Okay, I didn't want to address this, but you know what? There's so much stupidity flying about. I have to address the Brittany Griner prisoner exchange. I don't think I even mentioned Brittany Griner's name the whole time that this whole situation has unfolded. Yeah, okay, some WNBA player got arrested for bringing a bag of weed into Russia. Do I think that it was a coincidence? Do I think that, she just screwed up and got caught? No. Uh, do I think that the Ruskies probably knew that she did this on a regular basis? Yes. And do I think that her arrest was politically motivated? Yes. All of those things can be true, but that doesn't mean that I have to care about that more than anyone else getting arrested, for drug possession. I mean, the U.S. does that all the time. I don't see why I should be so mad about Russia, which is why I never talked about it. Do I think it's stupid? When Russia arrests someone and gives them 8 years in prison for a bag of weed? Sure, but I mean, the U.S. has given people life in prison for drug possession before, so I just, it doesn't feel like it rises to the level of an international incident. Which again is why I never discussed it. But the Biden administration has taken it upon themselves to get Ms. Griner out of Russian prison, which, hey, I guess I can give Biden some credit for freeing a nonviolent drug offender. Okay? Now, previously, he pardoned everyone who was guilty of simple marijuana possession in the United States or at the federal level. Which led to the release of exactly 0 prisoners, because I guess in federal prison there was no one currently serving time for simple marijuana possession. That's typically going to be a state crime. But nonetheless, Biden was able to finally release one person who was imprisoned on simple marijuana possession. It just happened to be a prisoner in Russia. Now, the conservative blogosphere, I guess you'd call them, that's kind of an outdated term. The conservative blue checks, the right-wingers, the pundits, whatever you want to call them, they are, they, of course, are attacking Biden, but they have two vectors of attack. One, I think, is fair. The other is bullshit. The first attack that they are levying against this exchange, carried out by the Biden administration, was that they only picked Brittany Griner because she's a lefty celebrity who hates white males and likes to walk around shirtless, like she's a man and play basketball, with just her basketball shorts, just like all the boys do, down at the rec center. And that rather than focusing on Brittany Griner, the Biden administration should have negotiated the release of another American who has been imprisoned in Russia, given a very harsh sentence since 2018. Apparently, there's this guy, Paul Whelan, who seems to be a retired Marine and a police officer who was in Russia and was arrested on, suspicion of espionage. I don't know the details about how long his sentence is, or if he was sentenced at all. Maybe he's just being held indefinitely, like a Gitmo prisoner. But the right wingers are pointing out this guy's case and saying, hey, he's already been locked up for 4 years. He was arrested specifically because and was suspected of being a spy because he was a Marine. This is a member of a hostile foreign military as far as Russia is concerned. And so they're saying, hey, sure, you may be officially retired, but maybe you are, maybe you're not. And we think that you're spying here on behalf of the Marine Corps or the CIA or whoever else. And so it is something that's much more the federal government's concern. Whereas Brittany Griner was over there, she knowingly broke Russian law. She did something stupid. She's probably been doing it for years. The Ruskies finally pounced on her, knowing probably that she's been doing it every single time that she comes in and out of the country, but they decided this time, for whatever reason, hey, we're going to pounce. And, she got caught with her hand in the cookie jar, or in this case, with her hand in a bag of weed. Whereas this guy, Paul Whelan, by most accounts that I've seen, I haven't seen anyone saying, hey, this guy is just a bad guy who got caught in Russia, who happened to be a former Marine, but he was locked up, for reasonable purposes. He legitimately broke Russian law, and that's accepted. I haven't seen anybody saying that this Paul Whelan guy is, just an American who happens to be in prison in Russia. It seems that he is legitimately a political prisoner who was locked up largely because of his affiliation with the U.S. military. That seems to be something that would concern the federal government much more than some WNBA player who likes to walk around without her shirt on. And so I think that the right-wingers, it's tough for me to talk about, like, the politics of this, because, like, does that even matter? You're talking about people who are, got their lives ruined, locked up in prison. This guy, who knows how long he's going to be in there. Griner would have been in there for at least 8 years. But I would say it's politically advantageous for the right to make this case. They found good pictures of this guy in uniform that they're plastering everywhere and saying essentially, Biden doesn't care, he's leaving this guy to rot. I guess you could have said the same thing about Trump, because this guy has been in prison since the Trump administration. But the other argument that the right-wingers are raising that I think is total nonsense is that they think that Biden traded away, this great, terrible terrorist Russian prisoner who should have never been released, and who, is a violent criminal that we should have kept locked up forever. The Merchant of Death, as he is popularly known, I don't even know what his real name is, was the prisoner who was exchanged. We heard rumblings about this a couple months ago, that they would trade the Merchant of Death for Brittany Griner. He is obviously someone who's a bit more high profile, I think, than a prisoner who just simply got caught with a bag of weed. They were not really on the same level. It's not like you're trading a spy for a spy. And so I guess you could say the right-wingers have a bit of a point as far as that is concerned. But the Merchant of Death, as silly as this might sound, he sounds like a big, scary guy. He wasn't locked up rightfully or, like, legally at all. From what I understand, the United States just went and kidnapped this guy from a foreign country, not the United States. It's not even clear that the Merchant of Death had ever set foot in the United States prior to his being arrested. And he wasn't arrested for things that he did in the United States. He was arrested for being an international arms dealer. And the U.S. decided, well, that violates domestic U.S. law. So they took this guy out of, like, Africa or wherever he was currently working, and they tried him as a criminal in the United States, where he's never set foot. I mean, they essentially, Julian Assanged him. The U.S. decided that their laws apply across the entire planet, and that if someone does something that they don't like anywhere in the world, the United States has the right to politically persecute that person and lock them up for the rest of their lives, or, execute them. And so while I don't think the Merchant of Death, is necessarily a nice guy, he's probably not. He's probably a really bad guy who, sells weapons to warlords and whoever else is willing to pay him. But he's no worse than the likes of Jamal Khashoggi and, Adnan Khashoggi, excuse me, the uncle of Jamal Khashoggi, who, was involved in Iran-Contra and all that, famous Saudi arms dealer. But America loves Adnan Khashoggi. He was our good friend, and they also love Jamal Khashoggi. In fact, that's why MBS, the guy who supposedly orchestrated this entire prisoner exchange, that's why MBS is such a bad guy, because he killed Jamal Khashoggi, the nephew of an arms dealer, just like the Merchant of Death. Now, what's the difference between Adnan and the Merchant of Death? Well, Adnan Khashoggi was a Saudi, and the Merchant of Death is Russian. It's not even clear that the Merchant of Death was necessarily good buddies with Putin. From what I understand, the Merchant of Death in the past had actually worked, in arms deals with the United States, helping the U.S. funnel weapons to, rebels and other terrorist groups that the U.S. was backing. So I'm not exactly sure why the U.S. Initially wanted to lock up the Merchant of Death, but they didn't do it, through legitimate means. They kidnapped him, and they've been holding him hostage for as long as he's been there. And I guess what they were, just keeping him around as a bargaining chip to use against Putin, in case they ever had someone that they wanted to get out of Russian jail who was at least as valuable to them as this Merchant of Death was to Putin. And again, it's not even completely clear to me how valuable this guy was to Putin, but perhaps, Putin just sees, maybe it's not such a great look to let the United States just kidnap a Russian citizen and imprison them, even if I'm not necessarily a fan of this guy. And who knows, this guy could be best buddies with Putin. I don't know. I'm sure after this, Putin owns this guy because he owes his life to him. And if I'm Putin, buying the life of an international arms dealer by simply trading away this annoying WNBA player who got caught with a bag of weed, that seems pretty cheap. If I'm Putin, you know what I say? That's a pretty good trade, because now he's got the Merchant of Death in his back pocket, and I don't think the Merchant of Death will be doing any deals on behalf of the United States ever again. So back to what the right-wingers are saying. They are chastising Biden for trading this guy away because they're going, oh my gosh, he's so bad. You can't let him out. No, you can't do that. Trump got people released from prison overseas too. And he didn't trade away the Merchant of Death. And then, of course, you got the leftoids retorting by going, well, Otto Warmbier died, when Trump was president. It's just such a stupid food fight. At that point, I tune it out. But I did think it was worth addressing this whole idea of, hey, was getting Brittany Griner out of jail, a great idea? And was this Ruski that they traded away for her, was he worth the trade? As far as I'm concerned, the guy shouldn't have been imprisoned by the United States to begin with. The U.S. does not have jurisdiction over the entire planet. As far as I'm concerned, if you do, think about this. In the United States, it's illegal to possess a machine gun unless you go through, all these hoops, and you get a $200 tax stamp, and, you get these things signed and notarized in triplicate and blah, 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 and you notify the federal government every time you cross state lines and all these things. There's all these hoops you have to jump through. What if I just, went to Cambodia and bought a machine gun, and I possessed it in Cambodia? Because I'm in a different country that's not the United States. Would I still be applicable to U.S. law? That would be crazy, wouldn't it? Could you imagine the ATF busting down my door in Cambodia and saying, you didn't file a $200 tax stamp? That's not a pre-ban, a pre-86 AK you've got there. That's a post sample, and you're not what is it, class whatever FFL. You can't possess that. That'd be cartoonish. But that's what they did to this guy, the Merchant of Death. They said, hey, you're selling guns that are illegal in America, in Africa, and you can't do that. It was no different in principle than what they're trying to do to Assange. They're trying to have Assange executed under the Espionage Act when he's never set foot in the United States. How do you commit espionage in the United States without ever setting foot in the United States? By that logic, the U.S. can extradite every spy from every country around the world under the Espionage Act because, well, they're engaged in espionage, even though they're not in the United States, let alone all the spies that are in the United States, which have diplomatic immunity, because that's how they get around these laws. If you're an actual spook, your country just puts you in as a diplomat, quote unquote. That's what most diplomats are, just spies. That's what diplomatic immunity is used for. It's to prevent actual spies from being charged under laws like the Espionage Act. What the Espionage Act is really used for is to politically persecute people who oppose whatever the current war happens to be. At any given time. That's why it was passed back, around the time of World War I, and that's what it was used for back then, and that's all it's ever been used for. So those are my thoughts on the whole Brittany Griner, Paul Whelan, Merchant of Death saga. Do I wish that Paul Whelan guy was let out? Probably. He sounds like he was much more in need of being freed. At least Brittany Griner, even though she got a tough sentence, she will be let out eventually. Which is more than I can say for, some American prisoners. So it's, this doesn't seem that crazy to me what the Ruskies did. You can say, oh, it was politically motivated. I think it probably was. But hey, we've got a term for that here in the United States. It's called prosecutorial discretion. The government prosecutes people sometimes just to make an example out of them. And that's what the Ruskies did in Brittany Griner's case. Not clear to me that they did anything illegal at all, which is not to say that I support her being locked up. But this Whelan guy, seems to me, and I agree with Micah Parsons, who is now getting smeared as a MAGA troll, closeted Trump supporter who has let the mask slip. He was a MAGA guy the whole time because this one football player happened to say, you know what, I've got a lot of veterans in my family, and I think that, if you've got a Marine that's locked up overseas, specifically, for the crime of being a U.S. Marine in a foreign country, the government has a bit more of a responsibility to bail him out of jail than they do someone who gets caught with a bag of weed. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.